Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the annual Women in Sport and Leadership event proudly presented by Mcmaster Athletics and RBC. My name is Alexa Lucky, and I am from the RBC on-campus branch right here at McMaster University. And we're so excited to be hosting our second annual Women's Day event. This time last year, we would have been together for one of our last in-person events at McMaster University, and we could have never imagined what this year would be looking like. You're probably all tuning in from home or from work to virtually come together this year. One thing I've witnessed this year is how adaptable, resilient, and flexible women have been. Women have so much to juggle between taking care of their families, our children, ourselves. I can't wait to reflect on our accomplishments this evening and lock in our confidence and optimism to keep pushing forward no matter what the future has in store. I want to thank the McMaster Athletics team, our hosts and panelists for working together to bring you this insightful dialogue tonight. We will have a question and answer period at the end where I encourage you to ask those burning questions on your mind and build your network. Make a commitment to yourself to connect with somebody you've never met before in this virtual world. Connecting with somebody new in this environment or hearing the conversation tonight may feel uncomfortable, but harness the discomfort and grow in a new way. I know that's something that women do incredibly well. Before I pass it over to our Director of Athletics and Recreation, Sean Burt, I would like to recite McMaster University's land acknowledgement. McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee Nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Thank you all for taking the time to invest in yourself tonight, learn, and share this evening. I will pass it over to Sean Burt.
Well, thank you very much, Alexa. A great introduction, and thank you to our friends and supporters at RBC for supporting us on this very important event. I'm really pleased to offer some opening remarks and thankful to Claire Arsenault for asking me to do so. I feel very fortunate in my life to have been surrounded by some incredibly inspiring and amazing women, including wife, Jennifer, my daughter, McKenna, who's 16, my wife, Barbara, my late mom, Barbara, and my sister, Kelly. I have learned so much from each and every one of those women. And one of the things that I've noticed over the past several years is that we have a lot of work to do from an equity perspective. There's no question about it. I was doing a little bit of research ahead of tonight's event, and I was astonished at some of the statistics that I saw. So in 2020, for example, 49% of companies with boards of directors do not have a woman on their board. And that's actually up 10% from 2019 when that number was 60%. The other thing that really resonated with me is that on average, women earn about 82 cents for every dollar that a man earns in a similar position. And at some organizations, specifically in the tech sector, 41% of the time, companies only interview men for the highest paying positions. These statistics have to change. The last time I checked, someone's ability to lead has nothing to do with their gender. And I see it every day with our student athletes, with our staff and administration, and many people across campus. And so events like this evening help us on that journey towards equity. And it's quite clear that we have lots of work to do, but these are very important events to help us be better. And I really am excited to hear from our panelists. And I know that there's going to be some incredible insights that we're all going to share tonight and learn from as we seek to be better as an organization ourselves. So I'm really thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Enjoy the event, and I know I will too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. And I would like to introduce our amazing hosts, Brianna, Weiss, and Bennett Swann, to get the conversation started tonight.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining. We'll start with me. I'm Brianna Weiss. I'm a fifth year McMaster kinesiology student, and I play on the women's field hockey team. I've been playing with the team for 4 years now and captaining the team for 3. So I've been able to kind of be around the athletic department for quite a while now. I also am involved in the Varsity Leadership Committee. So I've been the co-president of that actually since it started up a few years ago. And it's been nice to see kind of how that committee has changed and grown over the years, and how the group of people who have been involved have really shaped kind of the direction of it. I attended this event in person last year. Obviously, it's a little bit different this year. But when Claire approached me to be one of the co-moderators for it, I jumped on it because I took a lot away from this event last year. Hearing the panelists speak was just something super inspiring to me, and just being able to, I think, learn the importance of networking and being able to ask for help and for guidance from people who are already professionals in the field. And I think a huge thing I took away was like women who are in these positions, in these amazing leadership positions, doing so much in their own careers, want to help who is up and coming. And I think that was a massive message that I took away. And so I hope that within our discussion with the panelists, we can have everyone leave today with some big take home points and kind of feel like this has influenced them in a positive way. That being said, I will pass it over to my co-host Bennett to introduce himself.
Thanks, Brianna. Hello, everyone. My name is Bennett Swann. I'm in my 4th year here studying honors history and playing on the Mcmaster men's volleyball team. And over my 4 years at Mac, I've become really passionate about the topic of leadership and have tried to do my best to give back to the athletic community as well as I can. And while I am not a woman, I empathize with the fact that my experiences in life differ from those of a woman. And I'm serving as a moderator as a man on this panel to show the importance of men being involved in this discussion. Equity, inclusion, and gender gaps exist, and the first step towards solving these problems is through conversation. So I'm very proud to see that a lot of my fellow male student athletes and male administration are a part of this call. I think we all have a lot to learn, and it's awesome that I'm here to be able to facilitate that side of the male conversation and really work towards more equity. So without further ado, let's hear from our panelists. Melissa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Perfect. Thanks, Bennett. Greetings, everyone. I'm Melissa Poole. I'm a very proud double Mac graduate with a BA in Labor Studies and an MBA. I'm also the university registrar, and my group handles everything from recruiting applicants to current student administration through to convocation, which is just an awesome part of my job. Prior to returning to Mac, I worked in various supply chain roles at 2 great organizations, Celestica, an electronic manufacturing organization, and SciEx, a medical technology company. And in those roles, I was lucky enough to travel to many parts of the world, which are experiences I'm awfully glad for now. I've always played sports, and so I want to give a special shout out to all the athletes on the call today. You are amazing. And last but not least, I am a wife and a mother to 2 mostly wonderful boys. Thanks, Bennett.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Peggy?
Hi, everyone. My name is Peggy Carrapatine. I am a mom of a 6 years old. So COVID-19 has been very interesting the last year, to say the least. I'm a daughter of war refugee and an immigrant to Canada. I've had a very interesting career journey so far. I've spent almost 20 years at RBC. And I've had probably about 10 different roles at RBC. And the last 10 years, I spent most of my career in HR, focused on various topics. So that would include like diversity and inclusion, career management for young talent, and also future of work. And I'm so privileged to be surrounded by this like amazing panelists here. All have an association to sport. I have to declare that I'm not a woman in sports unless if you count the Peloton in my basement. I'm so glad to be a part of this. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Peggy. Jahan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here, especially with this amazing group of women. I've worked in sports my entire career, so that's I don't want to date myself, but that's 19 years. I started my career with the Boston Red Sox, then I worked for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and then moved here to Chicago to work for the Cubs. And then I finally took that leap of faith that I wanted to do for a very long time and started my own business. So I am a consultant. I run a consulting company for sports organizations who want to align their fan experience to their brand promise. But my favorite part of my job is the other side of my business, which is career coaching for women who work in sports and helping them find their voice and tackle exactly what's getting in their way and allow them to go after exactly what they want. And I'm also the host of the Game of Her Own podcast, where I interview influential women who work in the sports and entertainment industry.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jahan. And finally, last but not least, Liza.
Hi, my name is Liza Smith. I don't work in sports in my day job. My day job is to be the director of sales at a company called CPA Site Solutions. And so that is a rapidly growing SaaS company. So I work in tech, which is very male dominated, and I work in sales leadership, which is also traditionally very male dominated. But what I do on the side, and Jahan and I need to talk here this week, because what I do on the side is a lot of work with the women's hockey community. A few years ago, I was really, really moved when I saw the Canadian Women's Hockey League fold because of the loss of one sponsor. I'm getting chills just talking about it, because I have been brokering sponsorship relationships for over 10 years with minor league baseball teams, with college teams. And it struck me as how completely tragic it was, because selling women's hockey is actually really easy. I've done it. And so to see a league fold over one major deal going south broke my heart. And I reached out and said, hey, I'm one of the people out here who thinks I can help this problem get solved. Insert me somewhere. And that has led to many, many opportunities to work with the PWHPA, with Women's Hockey Life, with her Soul Shot, soon with Parity, to just really help solve the problem of how do we create a sustainable league for women. And for me, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. I really love to be I was never a team sports person, but I'm a long distance cyclist, and I was a mountain bike coach. And so I really like to see how much pain I can inflict on myself before I break. So I feel very comfortable and very at home in this world of, people who are in the startup mindset or in, professional athletics. It's a space that I thrive in. So I like to see how we can do a little bit better every day. And that's what motivates me. And that's what brings me here. And I'm really excited to talk to everybody who's on and to listen to these panelists who are brilliant. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Bennett and I have had a really awesome time getting to know the panelists, kind of like behind the scenes in preparation for this event. So we really hope that we do a good job at helping to just create a space where these panelists can hopefully just take it away and just like spread all of their advice and knowledge that like Bennett and I have already had the opportunity of hearing and learning about. So we're going to start up the discussion portion of the panel now. And then at the end, we will address the Q&A. So if you guys, once again, do have any questions throughout, you can drop them in the Q&A box and we will address those towards the end of the discussion. Moving into our first question, I will direct this at Peggy first. We wanted to start our talk by just digging right into the equity gaps and barriers that do exist. They exist everywhere we go. They exist in academia. They exist in all fields of work. And so we wanted to just start with a discussion of these equity gaps and put it out to the panelists to talk about how they've experienced and interacted with any sorts of equity gaps throughout their career. So I'll let Peggy start.
Sure. Let me just start off to say that not all gaps have the same distance. Some of them you just need a hand up, right? Some of them you can take a leap. Some you probably need to zip line across a valley to get to the other side. And to give you a little bit of a background, that my mom was born in Vietnam. Because she's a girl, she was not allowed to go to school. I was actually born in Hong Kong because she escaped the Vietnam War as a war refugee to Hong Kong. She met my dad there, and my dad worked his way up and became a very successful entrepreneur. And he actually had enough assets to actually to have enough credits to be an immigrant to Canada, because he wanted a better life and better education for my brother and I. And so one of the condition of that immigration is that he had to invest in the company when we arrived. And my mom, because she wasn't allowed to go to school, so she's still an illiterate to today. And my dad only had a middle school education. So with that, coming to a country that they don't speak the language, their business failed. And so at the age of 16, my family went bankrupt, and my parents couldn't speak a word of English. And so I had to actually drop out of high school to do 2 full-time jobs to keep my family off the street. And, when you say equity, it's not just the combination of the fact that I'm a woman, I'm a BIPOC. I'm also an immigrant, with an accent. And then I have no, back then I had no post-secondary education. I also, because my family are poor, I had no cushion to fall back on. So so I have to combat, the systemic barriers that face me, as a woman of color. But then also I have to combat a lot of it that it's invisible. And there are things like, my mom was told her entire life that because she's a woman, she's not good enough. She's not worthy. So I internalized that, for as long as I have existed. The fact that I didn't get, a post-secondary education, I always think that, I'm not smart enough, so I don't belong at the table. So, there are things that it's kind of, there are barriers that it's there, and then there are barriers that I put up in front of me. So, I would say that, I spent 20 years to try to fit in, right? I work hard, I try to prove my worth. But I'm also very ambitious because, my mom and dad didn't escape, where they come from to build a better life for me not to succeed. But the problem is that, leaders don't look like me. They don't look like me. They don't feel like me. And so I mean, certainly there are equity. I've faced a lot of barriers, but I would say I've been so lucky to have had a very great career, especially, the one that I've had at RBC so far. Like I mentioned, I've had like 10 different roles, so I've given great opportunities. I have to say, I don't think I've ever been maliciously discriminated against throughout my career. But that's not to say, right? There haven't been any unconscious bias. There haven't been any, maybe ignorance or microaggression. I remember that I really wanted to redeem myself, and so I decided to do my executive MBA. And so, because to get into the program, I needed to have a recommendation. So I went to one of my female mentors. And I remember, so she knows my story, the story I just told you. And she told me, she's like, well, I don't know. Your son is so young. Is this really the right time? And this could really break your family apart. I've heard a lot of people who got divorced because they did their MBA while working full time. And then, the comment that hurt the most was when she said that, I'm not sure if you have the stamina to go through it. And I'm like, did you did you not hear the story that I told you? I'm like, I raised my family. So, I think there's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of barriers in terms of systemic. There's also a lot of barriers in terms of, I think sometimes maybe women don't even support women. And so there are things that needs to be changed at the institutional level. But then also there's so much work ahead of us in shifting how we think about ourselves, how we think of each other. And I want to share that story because on the topic of equity, I just want to say, not all inequality are the same, right? The challenges that, maybe a BIPOC who their parents are lawyers would face very different challenges than somebody who's from, Young and Finch, who has a, single mother, who's a son daughter from a single mother. So, yeah, I think I want to start up with, the story isn't just, we are not just our gender, we're not just the color of our skin, but we're also our whole story.
I think that's a great point. And that's where we really wanted to make a highlight in this panel is that, yes, we're bringing a group of people here to talk about women in sport and leadership. But when we talk about the barriers that women face, we have to talk about the barriers that people of color face and people within the LGBTQ community face and people with various abilities. When we look at, gender equity and barriers, we have to consider everything else as well. I'll open that up to any of the other panelists who want to jump in and talk about equity gaps, and if you have any personal stories or experiences that you want to share.
I'm happy to share my first experiences working in sports. I remember when I got my job at the Red Sox and I was so excited. And I don't think it dawned on me, baseball, well, in Boston, let's just say, is traditionally white. So I just wasn't paying attention, head down, wanted to get a job in sports, wanted to work for the Red Sox. I was in Boston getting my master's at the time. And so, when I did finally get that job and my first day, I remember walking around and, I said this to people before, but when you're part of a minority group, when you are somewhere, you look for people who look like you. It's what you do. I've always done it. And, I walked in and it was oh, okay, there's not a lot of people who look like me. Got it. And so I'm used to that because that's, I was one of 4 Black people in my graduating class from high school. So I think I'm used to it, but I just thought it'd be different when I got out of, a small town and moved to a big city, but it wasn't. And this was, in 2002. So I looked for people who look like me, and then women. So I started to look for people. I wanted to be an executive in sports. That was my goal when I was, 24. And there wasn't a lot of women in executive roles either. There was one person, and she wasn't really active in the organization. So it was strange because at the same time, it didn't discourage me. It almost gave me fuel to want to be that person. So I look at it that way, but at the same time, representation matters. So when there is someone who looks like you and doing something that you want to do, I don't want to say it makes it easier, but it's just, there's something different happens and it inspires you and motivates you. And then you can also connect with that person and lean on them. And, I was lucky that my first boss in sports, is a woman, and she, but that's a lot to carry for her. So all of the women, she was at the director level at the time. She's now an SVP, still with the Red Sox, but it's a lot to carry when you think about it. All these women are looking up to you and seeing what you're doing and what move you're making. And, I didn't feel that pressure when I first started. But as I grew in my career, I definitely started to just feel that pressure of oh, wow, all right, everyone's watching. You have to make it. You have to do everything right. You have to share all of your time so you can help people and bring people forward behind you. But I would say that was the biggest, it was just as soon as I got there, it was just a lot of white men in positions of power. And I say that not to say I don't like white men. Like my father-in-law is an old white man. You know what I mean? My husband is white. So it's not that. It's just I never wanted to be anywhere where everybody was exactly the same. It's kind of boring, to be honest with you.
Thanks, Jahan. I think Melissa had her mic unmuted, so she's ready to go.
Perfect, thank you. And yeah, thanks, Johanna. And I just want to echo a little something that Peggy said about some of these early messages we get. And I remember I was in high school, sat with the high school guidance counselor, and I remember he looked at me and he said, well, why are you bothering with university? You're just going to get married anyways. And he said it, and it was flip and it was glib for him. And obviously you can see that it's still with me to this day. And I think we've just got to be so careful about those messages that we send to people, especially when they're young. And, and I'm going to encourage everybody who's heard that and maybe, has one of those messages they're carrying with them to jettison them, because it's so, so unhelpful. But I think it just is, it's so systemic, and it gets buried and it gets communicated to people when they're very young and very early in their life. And it has impacts that reverberate just through the rest of their careers and such.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, something I wanted to just make a connection there with is, we have we tell those stories, or we've heard those stories as younger women. And although, I can say I've never heard someone discourage me from pursuing education, it's definitely something that's very relevant still in the sporting world for women. And kind of that, it's very commonplace to see a young boy encouraged to dream big. And, being a professional athlete is something you hear from so many kids that are male, and you don't hear that from young girls. And you also don't hear it being encouraged in young girls or young women. I've had a conversation with a friend of mine who is on the women's volleyball team, and we've talked about the fact that, she's like, for me to pursue professional is a totally different situation than my boyfriend who is on the men's volleyball team pursuing professional. It's a different story, and we've been told different things as we grow up. So even viewing those things as opportunities, sometimes we haven't had the ability to dream like that because no one's told us that we're allowed to. Liza, you had your mic there unmuted for a sec, so I'll pass it over to you.
Well, yeah, I think every woman of a certain age here has a story like that. I was told, I tried to drop typing in high school because I was terrible at it, and I was working on an art school portfolio 1,000 million years ago. And the guy the typing instructor wouldn't sign the slip because he said, well, I don't know how you ever expect to get a job. You're a terrible touch typist. This is in 1994, which feels like yesterday. And I remember just being like, oh, nothing fuels me like a comment like that. And I think I had a subconscious block against touch typing for the next 15 years. Now I'm a great touch typist, but I guess I would say, even though it might not be so explicit because we've learned a little bit, right, about how to behave, those biases are still there. That guy still has a job. And I think I always want to say, we could talk about the problems that exist all day long. I think it's really, really important to talk about realizing that everybody who's listening to this who has some kind of story like that. And what's really important is that you don't internalize it. So Peggy started this whole conversation about her internalization of things, right? And we're talking about how if you can't see something, you can't always feel like you can be it. I always challenge people that if somebody says something like that to you, consider it a dare, dare to prove them wrong. And if there's something that you don't see, that's great, because you can invent it. I mean, it's way harder to be the first. It's way harder to build the template, but somebody has to. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean you can't do it. You just have to be a lot braver, right? To be the first one out of the gate, but just analyze your own reaction to those things, right? Stop and ask yourself, is that true? Is that, because the opportunities lie in these places where there is sort of darkness a little bit and there is no light shining, but you can kind of just tiptoe your way forward, and you can go places where other people haven't gone. You really can do that. So I think it's just important to like be brave. Just be brave. Don't take those things in and make them part of your fabric. Reject them.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's just so much, powerful information that's being shared just in the first 20 minutes of this panel. But just to summarize briefly, some of the takeaways that I got from that was, that these gaps are systemic and they begin at a young age. And so whether we're going to, resolve things way down the line in our lives, it really needs to start, in the way that we nurture young women through their lives, and making sure that we don't, close doors before they even have a chance to be opened. And another great takeaway is that, these identities are cross-sectional. You are not just a woman. You are not just BIPOC. There are a lot of, different ways that you can identify yourselves. And so that makes, equity gaps such a complex subject, as Peggy and Jahan, you both pointed out. It's not just, let's solely save things based on, a gender topic or something like that. There's a lot that needs to be addressed. And again, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't put all our effort towards it, because we should. We just need to understand that, you can't solely focus on one thing and fix it overnight. And finally, the most inspiring thing is just, what you just said at the end there, Liza. Don't internalize it. Don't be afraid to address it, and do what you can to be brave and find your voice. So you've all identified some of the barriers you've experienced in your career so far. I'd love to hear, as female leaders, what has been the most significant barrier in your career? And what do you think in general are significant barriers for female leaders? And Jahan, why don't we have you open up this question?
Sure. Great summary, by the way. That was really helpful. All right. So I think, the first thing I think for me, the first thing that pops in my head when you say that is opportunity. And what I noticed throughout my career, and at first I didn't know what was happening. And then I was like, oh, like it's these invisible opportunities. And so all of a sudden, somebody was a, special assistant, and then the next week they were a vice president. And I was like, well, how'd that happen? And then, I just started to see that happen. And there was one common denominator. It was always men. And they always happened to be white. And I was like, well, what am I doing wrong? And so, to Peggy's point, I started to internalize it, and I thought it was me. And so I would say that's a barrier, but like Liza said, let's talk about the solution and not the problem. So for me, I had to learn how to use my voice. I'm an introvert, I'm a little shy, but I'm ambitious. It's a really weird combination. And I'm sure some of you can relate, but I had to learn how to use my voice. I had to figure out how to speak up, because those opportunities weren't going to come to me if I just sat back. So I feel like that can be an obstacle for female leaders now, and then people who are up and coming and trying to get into, the industry or the workforce. It's being able to use your voice, having the courage to use your voice, having the courage to just speak your truth and say, what you want. So for me, the first time, I got my job at the Red Sox. It was part-time. I was making $6.25 an hour, did not care, was the happiest person in the world, and loved the entire experience. But I wanted to be there full-time. And so when I graduated and got my master's, I was like, I want to be full-time. But there's no positions in the department that I want to be in. There's only my boss, and that's it. And everyone else is part-time. So what do I do? If I sit and wait, nothing's going to happen. Right? If I wait for that job description to come up, I'll be waiting forever. So I finally just, with the help and encouragement of my mom, who's such a boss, I was finally, it took a while, and she kept trying to push me, and I finally, okay, just do it. What's the worst that can happen? And I did it, and I talked to my boss about it, and she was like, okay, this is good. She's like, let's figure out how to make you full-time. I think that you belong in this department too. And so she created a position that didn't exist. And so then I got to go on to be, to run the department that I was hired to work in, and made much more than $6.25 an hour. But it started when I finally was okay with using my voice and realizing that I could speak up. And even if I was shaky, I had to push through it. And I kept doing that throughout my entire career. And so all the positions I had moving forward, from that coordinator position all the way to the Cubs being an executive, all those positions, they didn't exist. So I had to work to create them, or there was like a breadcrumb that someone dropped and I followed up on it, and it all kind of came to be. So I would say, I'm a storyteller, so I'll keep going forever, but I'll just say using your voice can be, I think, one of the biggest obstacles, but also the biggest solution.
That's amazing. Yeah, I know, John, you had shared that with us before, and that was a massive takeaway and a big theme that we thought we were going to be able to pull out of this call, is just the importance of finding your voice. So we'll unpack that a little bit later in the call. Peggy, I don't want to call you out here, but I did remember you made a comment earlier to us about, some of these, on the note of Jahan speaking about how, she has a naturally shy and introverted disposition, but is very, ambitious and had to find her voice. And I know, Peggy, you made a comment earlier to us about, certain types of adjectives that are used to describe women in those scenarios, and sort of the danger of using that type of wording when describing, some of these women when it comes to finding, new opportunities. So perhaps you can unpack that for us a bit.
Yeah, I think that's where it comes down to that unconscious bias. And there's a ton of studies out there. And unconscious bias, it's so complex. But to what you were just saying earlier, sometimes it's just the question that you ask, right? I remember when I was doing my MBA, so there are about 30% of us are women, and the rest are men. There's not that many of us who have young children, but there are probably about, like, I don't know, like 10 of us do. So when I told people that, I have a back then 2.5-year-old at home, oh my God, you should see their face. They're like, who is watching him? And I'm like, I have a husband at home. Like, no, I didn't leave him on the side of the street while I go to school. Like, what do you think? And so, but then when it's the same thing, right? Like my peers who have a young child, right? The question was never be, oh, who's watching your child at home while you're studying? Like, nobody ever had that reaction. So like, we have to really check ourselves and say, like, well, how are you positioning your question to just different gender, for example? And then to your point about descriptor, and I did a little bit of a experiment of my own, that I found people typically use words that are not promotable when they describe women. So they will say things like, oh, Peggy's detail oriented, she's thoughtful, she is friendly. And then in the same, probably same conversation, they might say to my husband, like, oh, he's so smart, so articulated. And but if you look at the descriptor, they're not bad, like what it's been described to me, but I would want to hire the intelligent person, not the friendly person, right? So I think we have to check ourselves on, how we are asking questions, how we're describing, our peers, and that might have led to some of, the incidents where, Johan was saying, how does someone who climbed up the ladder so quickly? Well, maybe the person kept being framed as he's smart, right? Whereas we're just, she's good at taking notes at a meeting. And so, I say, it's so complex. So we can talk about this all session around unconscious bias for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Peggy. Go ahead, Liza.
Yeah, I wanted to say one of my favorite resources to give young women, usually, although honestly, young men could benefit from this too, around that is the Mel Robbins workbooks around career related stuff. And I'm curious, if anybody's ever used any of them, but one of the things that she talks about is making sure that your reputation precedes you. And so Jahan and I had the exact same experience. I'd be like, I want to go for that promotion. And my boss would be like, you are doing so good in your job. We can't lose you from that position. And I was like, yes, you can. You're going to lose me right out that door. And I had to get lost out that door a few times, right? Like, and I was like, what do you mean? Like, somebody didn't hire me for a job once. She was like, you are my favorite candidate, but your boss would never forgive me if I hired you away from him. It is not running my life, right? Okay, so one of the things that I discovered I needed to do is make myself so much more attractive to the person who would hire me into the promotion that the person one level down couldn't get in my way anymore. And so I think it's really important for those of you who are going into the work world for the first time is realize that like you really need to position yourself within an organization as having a reputation for doing great work, but wanting more. And you need to tell that story about who you want to become to the people who are not your boss. Like your boss is going to want to hold on to your great work ethic, right? You need to be promoting yourself outside of your little sphere. And you do need to be using language. If you're a woman, look at, the way your resume is written, look at your review, suggest better language, look and see if it's action oriented and if it's direct. Google some of the 1 zillion studies that Peggy's talking about that are out there and make sure that you are promoting yourself in that light because nobody's going to do it for you. That is the thing. Like I'm a great boss. Like women like to report to me. I'm very good to, I can support these women all day long, but there's only so much I can do, right? I'm not in charge of their career. They're in charge of their career. I'm in charge of their performance at their job. So you can have mentors and great bosses, but you have to own your life, your brand, and you have a lot you have to do to make sure that you don't end up in that position like we're just talking about, because we've all been there where you're just like, wait a minute. Like the most insulting thing was always like, you're doing too good a job to be promoted. That is just, and it happens. Look at all these like.
I just want to add something to what you said, Liza. So I think there's the perception that if we do good work, people will know it. Okay, we'll be recognized as long as we work hard. But there's actually research out there that is done around the different way how men and women do things. So if you were given a project, women would take 100% or 110% of their time to actually make the project until it's finished, it's perfect. Whereas men will actually spend 80% of their time to do their project up to a certain point. We call it MVP, minimal viable product, and then they spend the 20% of their time selling it. They use, so just think about how they're utilizing their time, and that changed the narrative a lot. And I actually read something the other day, which is fascinating to me, and I've never thought about it this way, is that I think, so me as a woman, I think about my weight, my appearance a lot. And men might not spend actually that much time thinking about it. And so if you spend less time worrying about these things, maybe you have more time to actually go after the job that you wanted to go after, right? This is like something else, but so during the pandemic, my husband lost 30 pounds, became a vegan, started running like five miles per day. And I was at home like crying as my son was like, Mom, 8 + 2 = 9. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, so, it's all these things like so small, but it adds up to so much burden. It's insane.
Liza, I will say, Peggy, that was really funny. I didn't mean to laugh so hard, but that was a great story. Liza, so like you nailed it, right? The talking about yourself and really branding yourself, and we don't do that. And that's something, as you said, I was like, oh yes, that's something I noticed too, is that men were always talking about what their wins. They were always talking about the work they were doing. And sometimes I was like, oh God, do we always have to talk about work and what we're doing? But then I started to notice, I was like, these are the very same people who are going further and promoting, getting promoted and getting those invisible opportunities that no one ever hears about. And it's because they're always talking. And so again, thinking about solutions, if any of you who are listening are in internships or have already started working, whatever you're doing, you can, the one thing I always teach, I'm teaching a course right now, and the one thing I always teach is your weekly top 3. So it's always to have 3 things literally in your back pocket. I started doing this before, what do you call these? iPhones. So I had a BlackBerry, so I put a Post-it in my back pocket, and I always remember the top 3 things I was working on. And so if I ran into, let's say, the president of the club in the kitchen, and he asked me how my weekend was, I could tell him about my brunch where I drank too much and hung out with my girlfriends and let loose for the weekend. Or I can tell him about something that he truly cares about and that's going to help him look good. And so I finally, it wasn't until I got to the Cubs, I started doing it like regularly, always had my weekly top 3 with me. And anytime there's small talk with somebody who wasn't my boss, somebody outside of my department, I wanted to brand myself so they knew the work that I was doing and they realized how valuable I was. And it helped tremendously.
Wow, that's really interesting, and a very actionable thing that everyone in this call can, start to do right away. I know that's a fault of mine, is underselling some of the things that you succeed in. And if I'm doing it, then surely other people are doing it as well. So thank you, Jahan. Melissa, I'm going to offer the floor to you if you have anything else to add before we move on to our next question.
I think everybody's expressed it so well, because it really is one of those things. Trying to promote yourself is so difficult for some people, but I certainly experienced exactly the same thing, right? Where it just needs to happen. And, it's essentially just sharing all the good work that you've done so that others can see, hear, and build off it as well. And it just places you in the right place. And I think, that more than anything is to get your voices at the right table. And to make sure you're in the right conversations, and all of this leads to that. So I'm just going to turn it back to you, Bennett, because I know, it's a theme you're going to build on.
Okay, I'll hop in. I think that those are some wonderful messages there, and we have been able to spend some time kind of unpacking that with you guys separately too. And I think something that's been brought up in the conversation before is just showing up wherever you are. And that's kind of what the panelists have alluded to in the past little while there is, I just kind of wanted to pull it back and talk about us as students right now. This very much does apply to you. Most of the people watching right now are students, and many will be student athletes. And this conversation doesn't stop with you being in the working world, you being in a professional career. It starts now in the sports that you're involved in, and the clubs that you're involved in, and the friend groups that you have, and the connections you have with professors and within volunteer positions. Show up to where you are now. And I just wanted to kind of share a little thing that has always stuck with me is my grade 10 history teacher used to always, he preached to us, just be the best that you can be at whatever you enjoy, and don't listen to job trends. If people are telling you don't be a teacher because there's going to be no jobs in it by the time you graduate, don't listen to that. Listen to what you want to do. Be the best that you can be at it. And if there are no opportunities, create your own. And I think that that's something that a lot of our panelists have just alluded to recently, is they've had to create their own positions. They've gone and they've pursued excellence, but even then sometimes a job to apply to didn't exist for them. And so they've had to demand that a position be available for them to exemplify their strengths and actually utilize their skills. And their worth. We've obviously got this group here who has been able to establish themselves in all of their careers. And so the next question that we wanted to dive into, and I'll start with you, Liza, is just how did you find your voice and get to that point where you were starting to become more comfortable, and not just comfortable, but confident in your own skin?
So I just want to start this by saying I'm still finding my voice. And I think, all right, so I'll be 44 in a couple of minutes. And it is not something that magically happens one day and then you're good. Okay. So I just want to I'm thinking about most of you are sitting here looking at us. We look like finished products to you. We are not finished products. We are just 20 years down the road. So first of all, you find your voice the way you build a muscle, very slowly, right? And over time. And then there are days where you look in the mirror and go, oh, but it's not like that. So first of all, just don't think that any of this stuff needs to happen overnight or you're doing it wrong. But there's a few moments where I really did find my voice. And I will tell you, the bad news is they all come from some kind of adversity. Like the good things in life come from the tough stuff, period. So Peggy, while you were talking, I was thinking a lot about how my family is, I'm first generation to go to college, first generation to put myself through grad school. Definitely the first person in my life, in my family's life, to kind of just sort of say, I want to be a professional. I want a white collar job. And also I want a, blaze a path in women's sports, a field that doesn't actually pay anybody. Like that brand new theory. And so the way that I think I found the, ability to do that is because I was sort of like an army brat. Like my dad was, moved us around a lot. So I've lived in over 40 places. And I actually, you wouldn't know it by talking to me, but I test as an introvert and all my friends are like, you're an introvert. I actually am. I'm really fine being alone in a bubble all the time, doing research and then writing. I could do that forever. But what I discovered is that all of my good work was really, really missed because of my introversion. So I feel like this is such a theme on this panel. And so as a professional, I really realized that I was setting myself up for failure by not figuring out how to do that. And what's funny is I'm going through another phase of that in my life right now, where I'm realizing all this work I've done in the women's sports community, I haven't bothered to put out there anywhere. It's like, it's a secret right now because I have my day job and this was just something I was doing for passion. Well, it's time to actually start talking about it. This is actually the first time I've talked about it in this sort of a forum. I'm always behind the camera, filming Olympians, writing words for them to say, right? So it is, and I felt like I have no right to talk about that. It's about them. Well, no, I can't do more to help them if I don't talk about it. So it's a process. But the thing we talked about in preparing for this that I wanted to share, that I know you guys want to talk about a little bit, is the importance of your authenticity, and how being your authentic self really helps. And I have spent like a week trying to find a better word than authenticity. I hate these words. They're so buzzwordy. They're like on pillows or whatever. But the reality is that you need to be as true to who you are as you possibly can while comporting yourself with dignity and respect for other people and grace. You still have to make sure that you are true to your values. And so for me, what that meant was really making sure that when I was ready to come out, that I did. And so I'm married to a woman, I'm very out at work and I'm very involved in the gay community. And I made a really, really clear decision that I was going to be out everywhere in my professional life, because what I really unpacked for myself was that once it was safe for me to do that, and I had financial security and I was safe enough to make that decision in a practical way, because I grew up super poor. I didn't have a safety net either, right? So once I was secure enough to be able to do that and not take an unreasonable risk, and I was in a safe community, and I could do that, I realized my entire life shifted because people responded to me totally differently. As soon as I was able to be completely honest about my life, about my relationships with everybody I met, it just changed the character of the relationships I have. And it's very easy for me to have very forthright conversations with people in position of power, because I don't feel like I'm like doing this in a conversation, because I'm trying to like have a conversation, but kind of not have a conversation at the same time. And so, that for me is a lot about being very comfortable being an out lesbian, but it's really important that you bring your whole self into conversations so that you can have really, really open conversations. Because it might be about that, but I had to talk to my boss about needing to work abroad because my wife is Canadian and I'm like in a bi-national relationship, and I like had to flee America for Canada and COVID, and now I'm in French Canada. How could I have that conversation with my boss and be employed if he didn't know I married a French Canadian woman, right? Like really important stuff. But it can be about your kids, or women are taking care of their parents and their children at the same time. And it can be about mental health. It can be about anything, right? If you don't feel like you can have a conversation where you respect yourself with the people around you, then you really need to ask yourself about the environment you're in, right? And if that's the right place to be, or if you're young enough and have enough freedom to move on to a better climate. Because if you really can't have those open conversations, it just limits your ability to progress, I think. And I think everybody probably has lots more thoughts about that, but I just think that you have to be able to feel like you can comport yourself with a sort of wholeness. Or you really need to ask yourself about where you're sitting and if it's the right place. There's always another job, like that's sort of my thought at this point in my life. Although I'm a little spoiled now. Now I have a job and a savings account, so I can say that. But right, John's laughing. Like there's a time and a place for that attitude, right? And it's about 20 years in. But seriously, like you just don't give up too much for a paycheck, I guess is my point. Especially when the paycheck's like $10, like an hour. Like don't compromise too much. Especially when it comes to your values and just being yourself.
Thank you so much for that, Liza. And I think a big thing there is just like something that I've honestly took away a lot from last year's panel, and then even more in preparation for this panel, is like when you show up as like your true self, that is like the most marketable version of yourself. Okay. And even, I've been in multiple positions, in like student coordinating positions. I've coordinated for a couple different things within the university. And I've been the person where when I reflect on it, I'm like, oh, I was the person reading all the applications, and it wasn't the people with the most impressive credentials that I ever gave positions to. It was the people who could write within their application and tell me who they were as a person. And I could actually like identify with them and be like, oh yes, they have a passion for being here. They're not just doing it to throw this on their resume. And I always found that the people who, in a sense, advertised themselves like that and were honest and like just true to themselves, those are the people that I always found to be like the most attractive candidates for the volunteer programs that I've coordinated for. So a lot of what you said there, it's very like reaffirming to hear that is bring your authentic self, bring your true self, because that really is who people want to hire. And that really is going to be the key to, in my opinion, like enjoying what you do. We're going to spend the vast majority of our lives working, and to settle and like fit yourself into a box so that you can hold this particular career. I've had conversations with my friends, and I always try to challenge them to like is that worth it? Because there is more out there. There is. And if maybe it's not right now, but once again, popping back to that last question, create it then. Do we have any other panelists that want to pop in and chat about this question about, what it took for you to just kind of become more comfortable and confident in your own skin?
Yeah, I'll just add to what you said too. It's you should always show up as your authentic self when you go to work, because that's who they want, right? And that's who hopefully you were in the interview process, and that's who they hired. I think where it can be tricky is if an organization doesn't sort of value that sort of thing, and that's where it's on you during the interview process. The interview process is two ways, no matter what level, right? Internship, it does not matter, executive. You should always ask questions, do research, try to have informational interviews with people who are on your level as well, or even lower, just so you can get the truth, right? You can really understand what's going on and what that organization values. That's really important. It really is exhausting trying to be somebody else. I think things have evolved since all of us have started working, right? So things have changed and have gotten, better. But I remember when I was working, I thought I had to be like the men in the high positions. And that was, oh my God, that was so exhausting. And I remember telling my younger brother, who is my younger siblings are so smart. So he went to Princeton, he came to visit, and we went to a postseason game when the Red Sox were in the postseason, which is a big deal in Boston. And so I remember he was like, he's a comedian, he's really funny actually. And so he was just being funny, and I was like, can you please, and this is the time he still wanted to work in corporate. I was like, you need to calm down. These people are never going to hire you if you're acting like this. And that was, thank God he didn't listen to me. Like, it was the worst advice anybody could ever give a human. Like, I'm a coach now and I do not give advice like that. But like, as soon as I said it, I was like, really? Who cares? Who cares what the president thinks of my brother? Because my brother's just being him and he's having fun. And he has the most incredible life right now. And that's because he's always been his authentic self. So I think that's really important. And I will say one last thing is that the regret that you have from not being yourself is a lot worse than those uncomfortable conversations that you have to have. And I'll give you one quick story. I was in a room and we were talking about Black History Month, and there's a lot of executives, and I was so excited to be at the table, like so excited. I'm in there with a notebook and I'm trying to make myself talk. And this executive said to me, you should dress up. They were talking about doing like all these different things and like having people come in and like making an experience. And she's like, you should dress up as Harriet Tubman. And I was like, internally, I made the face that Liza just made. And I was just like, okay, this is how you see me. And I didn't see and I just kind of was like, no, thank you. No, I'm not doing that. And so this high level executive should not have used those words. But for me, on my side, and this is not my fault that she said this to me, but on my side, when it was over, like the meeting was over, people were like, you need to say something. You need to get her fired. And I was like, no, I don't want to ruffle any feathers, and I have to be good and not cause any problems to get to the top. And that was not the case. I could have spoke up, and I had regret about that, but I also was just like, I won't forget about it. I didn't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. So I just kind of ran from it. But the regret from not having that is a lot worse than probably the conversation would have been.
Yeah, I think right there, that's an amazing point, and something that often gets overlooked is being a woman in a workplace dominated by men, being a BIPOC in a place dominated by white people, being LGBT in a place that is dominated by, like more heteronormative individuals. In those situations, one, it's a shock, and you have to process that and then consider how you're going to react. But two, you have that questioning of how is this thing going to impact me, and like that often is a lot of work for you. So now you have this situation, and someone else just gets to continue and go about their work day. And here you are now saying like, okay, well, do I have to go to HR? Am I now having to file a formal complaint? That in itself, and like these kinds of things happen, and not saying that event you described isn't traumatic, but there are a lot of other things that happen that are like the severity scale varies. And now you're asking that person who has already been mistreated or something wrong has been said, and putting it on them to now take responsibility for dealing with that, in addition to all the work that they're already doing in their workplace, in their personal life. They face these microaggressions elsewhere. But I just think that's a very important like kind of story to highlight and show that, yeah, you see that in so many places, and we see it with women, and we see it with people of color, and we see it with people in the LGBTQ community. And I see that Liza has unmuted, so you can hop on.
I'll keep it brief. I could talk forever on this point, but I just want to say all your peers who came and said you should go to HR, I just want to highlight an opportunity for change for all you young ones. So here's the thing. Here's what should have happened in that meeting. Somebody who was not Jahan should have said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry. That seems like that was a really poor, a joke in poor taste. Let's talk about some real solutions." Like, you have to be the person who speaks up, right? So for the men in this room, when you look around the table and the four women at the table have their notebooks covered with ideas, but every time they try to speak, they get talked over, you need to signal boost them. So when they say something, you need to make sure that that gets reinforced. When somebody says something incredibly inappropriate, be the person to say no. Like, don't make the person who's subject to it do the work, right? So it's so simple. But the other thing we talked about is, like, have open and honest conversations. The men in this room can do so much to advocate for the women and their work lives, and you will have an ally for life if you do that, right? Like, so, if we're talking about International Women's Day, I've got this sort of my gender hat on here. Like, it's really, really easy to notice when women are not getting a voice. And it's really easy to be the one to say, I'm sorry, I'd like to hear from Kimberly and Michelle before we wrap up this piece, because I value their input, right? So, like, be the change, like, because it's still happening every day in every meeting, everywhere.
Yep, exactly. I think it's that conversation that we've all been hearing taking place, is use your privilege in a good way. It's as simple as that. Like, if you're the person sitting at the table and you're not being attacked by the given comment, like, you are, it's that concept of, if you're going to be quiet, like, you're in the same position as the oppressor. I wanted to just see if Melissa has anything to add to this question here about, just becoming comfortable and confident in your own skin and kind of throughout your journey.
Yeah, no, and it's such a good question. And, you reflect back over 20 some years and try to think back to I'll say the early days. And, those days when you're really new and maybe not as confident. And maybe I'll just say to those listening, think about your points of strength. Think about those times when you felt strong. Think about those times when you really nailed something, and capture that emotion and capture that sensation, and know that it's transferable to new things, and allow that confidence to propel you forward into, other areas of your life, because there's going to be lots of time and it's very easy to feel doubt, but you have to be very deliberate in remembering those times that you have really accomplished things, and then use that confidence to move forward. So I think I just kind of maybe add that.
That's great, Melissa. I think that's a great summary to a lot of the things that were initially answered in the question too. When it comes down to being authentically yourself and really finding that avenue to advocate for yourself, it is deliberate at times, because there is this notion of imposter syndrome that shows up, constantly. And it really takes a deliberate effort to, reflect on the positive things that you've done, reflect on your successes, and be proud of who you are. And from some of the conversations I've shared with, Bree and Liza, and from before, it's thinking about who you are as it being your superpower. And, sometimes you can leverage those unique traits that you have and offer a perspective that nobody else has. And that's something that hopefully the world starts to put a lot more emphasis on. And I think, as Liza mentioned to Bree and I before, that's certainly something that she pays attention to while hiring. So just to segue on from Jahan's point, and the emphasis, Liza, that you put at the end of saying that it's not the responsibility of just Jahan to address an issue that's clearly something that is unacceptable, and that's putting the burden again on someone who's already faced the trauma. It kind of ties into our conversation about allyship. So Melissa, on the topic of allyship, I'm curious, as a man, if you have ever interacted with any men who have been great allies, and what sort of skills you look for in men to be better allies.
So that's a really great question, and I think a really good one for me. So I'm about 24 years into my career, and I've probably had about 10 managers over that time. Only one has been a woman. So male allies have been absolutely critical to me, and I've been really lucky to have a number of great supporters, including here at MAC. But I think I'm going to talk about one of my earlier ones because it follows nicely from the last question. So he was my first manager in my first real job. His name was Larry Mazzotti. I started in an internship while I was doing my MBA in a technology manufacturing company called Celestica, and I was pretty green and I was pretty unsure of myself, and it was this huge company with all these really brilliant people working there, and it was all pretty daunting. But I was really lucky to have landed where I did because I worked for somebody who understood that. And I still remember at my first 1-year review, and he looked at me and he summed it up and he said, "Well, Mel, you really found your voice." And he looked as happy and as proud as anyone could possibly be about that. And he said it with this huge, big smile. So when I started there, I guess I'd been pretty quiet and scared to say anything at all. And then, time went on and I was working in a place I felt supported, and I knew what I knew about the things I managed, and I realized I had contributions to make. And I remember him saying that, and he made me realize that my voice mattered. And I don't even think up until that point I realized I had a voice or had thought about having a voice. So it was a really powerful moment for me. And I stayed there for a few more years and, working with Larry, and it was fantastic. But at some point, it was pretty evident that to move on or to move up, I had to move on. And so that was another conversation. And I went to him and basically said exactly that. And we talked about the pros and the cons. The cons being that the place I needed to go was not known as the most friendly place alive. But to move forward in my career, it was just an absolute necessity. And he made it happen. Like within a few weeks, I had a new portfolio, I had a new manager, I had new colleagues, and a huge unexpected bonus package. And so I moved over and was treated really well. And that's really what an ally can do for you. And he remains with me as that symbol of leadership of somebody who was so important to, like I said, a young new employee who hadn't yet kind of found her footing. And I'm always just so grateful for that. But I think too, part of it is just encouraging people to recognize that they do have a voice, that your voice is important. Same themes we've had, right? Take ownership of your career. And when you know that you need to move or to get a seat at a certain table, you are going to sometimes have to ask for it. And I've had to ask for it on more than one occasion. And I think it was Peggy who said, we sit back and we hope that it's our good work that gets noticed. And sometimes it does. But otherwise, when it doesn't, you really do need to take the bull by the horns, if you will, and make the ask. So yeah.
That was great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Yeah, I agree. I think, we all have a role to play in. It's sort of reflecting back on what you said to an earlier question is there's nothing to gain out of shutting anyone's doors before they even have a chance to look at them. And so it's really amazing to hear that you had that support when you were young and green. And hopefully that's something that the men on this call can reflect on and understand that that's something that we can do to help be better allies and to empower the amazing women in our lives. Does anyone else have any comments on the topic of allyship before we move on?
Yeah, I'll chip in. So I think there are two things that an ally should do. And Melissa touched on one, which is action. What can the person do to lift you up higher? And in the recent month, I really think about the people who have really sponsored me. In my career, and the difference in action that they've done is that they say my name in a room that is full of opportunities. Like that makes all the differences. Not somebody, so to me, I think a lot of people talk about mentorship, talk about, you have to find yourself mentor. Mentor is great. Mentor kind of, help you learn the rope, and probably give you a sense of, their experience, their expertise, their advice, so on and so forth. But mentor doesn't really turn into that ally or turn into that sponsorship who actually is actively advocating for you, actively putting your name forward for opportunities. And Johan, you have talked about opportunities is actually a barrier, right? So you actually need people to be putting you forward. So I think that's one action. The second is just listen. I have so many people because I proclaim as a feminist, and my friends sometimes they joke and they call me a radical left. And whenever we talk about these things, like a gender or like inequality, they would like they want to be heard, but so this is my like really good friends, but like he's white and he's men. I'm like, just shut the hell up. Like, listen to my experience. Like, you don't talk on behalf of me. Like, oh, but this is very complicated. And I'm like, no, you listen. Like, just listen. Why can't you just so? But sometimes, like I have to say, like it's not coming from a bad place. They, ally might want to share what they've learned, right? But sometimes, what the best thing an ally can do is just to listen and actually put themselves into your shoes.
I think that's a wonderful point there. And Peggy, you pretty much led us into our next question, but I did want to just kind of point out something you said there at the very end. Was you were saying just listen. I like recognize that it's not always coming from a bad place. And I think that's often true with so many situations. Is it doesn't necessarily come from a bad place, but it often comes from a misinformed place or a lack of awareness. And the great opportunity in that is that it is quite accessible and easy to go make yourself aware and to go educate yourself on things. And like even, men showing up to this panel is an act of trying to increase your awareness so that you can do better and so that you can support women and so that a woman can have a male mentor and that can, you know what I mean? Or a male sponsor. And like you said, like you have these people in the room who are not only just vouching for you when you ask them to, but they're actively going and like putting your name out there. And that actually segues perfectly into our next question, because we wanted to talk about the concepts of mentorship and sponsorship and just overall networking. Like, what are they and what's the importance of them? I will let anyone jump on this question first, but yeah, we just want to talk about basically letting the viewers know like the differences between mentorship and sponsorship and the importance of networking. And if you'd like to share any personal stories as to like how maybe you came to realize the importance of networking or how it plays a role in the success of your careers and personal lives today. I will leave that one open, and whoever wants to jump on it first, I'm going to say Liza because her mic is unmuted. So take it away.
I wanted to just bring up one thing about allyship. Maybe you guys have noticed, I'm really interested in pay equity and practical solutions. So I just want to talk briefly about things that young people can do to help each other. And I think this is the right place to put this. And one thing that I've worked mostly for men too. I had one female boss. She was probably my least supportive boss because I think she felt really threatened by me because she was the first and only woman in her role in our Fortune 500 company. And there was a fear there wasn't a lot of room, right? So that's old thinking, I hope. But anyways, here's what a really good ally can do for you. They will do things like tell you exactly what you should be getting paid at your job. And if they won't do that or they can't do that, a friend who is in exactly the same position will get comfortable enough to have an open conversation about how much you're making. You know, at my company, we are really, really, really like aggressively obsessed with making sure that people are paid in a really equitable way, because my CEO leads by example, and like, it's awesome. But that's really weird. And that's never happened anywhere else I've ever worked, where I've had the leadership be so clear about that and so consistent. So when I give a raise, I've got to do like 14 analyses of different people's job descriptions and pay grades to make sure that we're really being honest about it. But that's totally weird. And I've never seen that before. And I really think that what happens is that people having open conversations about their pay is really what drives some honesty in organizations. And so I always say, like, please, 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 if you are a young woman and you're going into the workforce, speak to your male friends who are going for the same kind of positions. Ask how they're negotiating. Ask what is the minimum salary they're taking. Have conversations about money. Not having conversations about money puts us at a huge disadvantage. And if you are a male ally on this call, like, seriously start those conversations. If one of your female friends is like, I just got a job offer, I'm so excited, and you're like, great, be like, what'd they offer? And if she says $45,000 a year and you just got a comparable job offer for 60, tell her. Because it's Glassdoor is only one source of truth, and it takes a lot of years of bravery to figure out how to bring a Glassdoor report to somebody and be like, I think you're underpaying me by $50,000. Like, you'll get there, but it's kind of hard to do tomorrow. So like, I mean, if you got the kind of grit, go for it. But I think it's really helpful when your friends are being honest with you, especially when you're all kind of on that level playing field. Because when you start out behind, it's that much harder to catch up. So talk to each other, and break this bias of like, oh, we don't talk about. It's not illegal to talk about what you make. Talk about what you make. Talk about what you make. That's it. Talk about what you make.
That was amazing. And again, another action that's easy for us as young people to take forward as we move towards the workforce, and as some of us move towards graduation. Peggy, I know that, sorry, this will be the last question before we move on to the Q&A. Just as far as timing goes, we're getting pretty late here. So in the nature of everyone's time, we'll move on after this. But Peggy, just as far as networking goes, I know you chatted with us about networking earlier on. I wondered if you had anything to offer about the topic of networking before we move on.
Yeah, and you know what? Networking is looking very different now, right, than a year ago. And networking before pandemic, it's not easy, but at least you can go out for a coffee. You know, you can ask people it's just easier to ask people when you can see people in person. Whereas now, I mean, the people I typically see each day in the office, and I go and say hi, I don't even say like hi to them anymore, like online. It's just, when you don't have a routine, have something set up to have a meeting with somebody, it's just not natural in this space. But here's the good thing that I found is that people, maybe because we stay at home for way too long now, and we are all kind of like wanting to talk to somebody else other than my husband and like my son, that we seem to be more welcome to strangers who reach out to us and who wants to talk about different topics. So I would say in terms of strategy, first of all, maybe start from your own network. So maybe your friends, your family. Do your friends' parents actually have a job that you wanted to pursue? Can you go from there? And if not, maybe a professor. So start with your network, because when the people make an introduction to you to somebody else, there's a bigger chance of the person saying yes. I think LinkedIn is actually a really good place to actually find somebody to talk to. Although the trick is that you do actually have to send a note that it's authentic. and heartfelt, and tell the person why you wanted to meet with them. So because of my title, I get like requests all the time, and sometimes I get requests that I scratch my head, that it says you must meet me. I'm like, no, I don't. Right? So like, think about how you ask. But I've met plenty of people through LinkedIn who have asked very genuinely, who wants to meet with me. And so networking is still a thing. The only one more tip that I would say is that, say for example, if you reach out to the panelist today and to ask us for a virtual coffee, at the end of the conversation, ask the person to introduce you to 2 more people. That's how you can expand your network. And just be, you don't have to. A lot of people give. They give advice of like, when you go into a meeting, make sure that you know exactly what you're asking. I don't think it's necessary, depending on who. But I think having the action item at the end to ask somebody to introduce you to somebody else, that's something that I'm totally buying.
That's great advice. Thank you, Peggy. And if you do want an example of someone who uses LinkedIn very well, I know Peggy had a post about this event that got a pretty significant amount of likes. So she is Exhibit A. So again, in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the Q&A, and there's some awesome questions in the Q&A that we want to address. Before we go there, I'd just like to reiterate how grateful we are to hear from the 4 of you and hear your experiences. Personally for me, it's been so inspiring to have these 2-on-1 and 1-on-1 chats and learn so much about each of you, and the tips that you've given just Brianna and I, and now this entire panel have been extremely valuable advice that, it's like that notion of networking. If you don't search it out and you don't get the opportunity to look for it, it might miss you. So I am so grateful that all of you are joining us tonight. I know the others are as well. So I just wanted to make that note before we move on to the Q&A. Okay, so first question of the Q&A. Let me make sure that I'm reading this exactly so I don't mess it up. So Felicia has asked, you've spoken a lot about how you found the confidence to speak up, which is amazing and so important. I was wondering if you had anything to add for women who are very vocal and maybe perceived as bossy or too loud. Would any of the panelists like to take this question on?
Liza is just laughing. By the way,
You're never gonna win that one. Just be yourself.
Yeah.
Win it. You're gonna go down in flames trying to be like the polite version of yourself. Then they'll just say that you're not direct. There's gonna be some crap. Women that can never win this. You're too quiet, you're too loud, you're too pushy, you're too soft, you're too mean, you're too nice. Literally, it is the biggest joke about being a woman. You will only ever be on this end or that end if somebody wants to criticize you. Don't worry about it. Just as long as you comport yourself in a way where you can feel comfortable that somebody played back a recording and you can defend your behavior. Try to find an environment where people respect women a little bit more than maybe the ones you've been in, but like, just don't worry. Just keep talking.
Yep. Yes, you were literally exactly right. Everything that Liza just said, everyone should write that down and do it, because I was on the end of someone told me, well, you're too quiet. You're not speaking up enough. And then, okay, but I was doing it and I was like, okay, I need to be better. Maybe I'm falling back into, being an introvert and I'm being quiet and I'm not, speaking up enough. And then in the same time, maybe a month or 2 later, I was too arrogant. And I was like, well, now I don't know what to do. Like, this is super confusing. And for me, I was in a place in my career where I realized I was like, it's time to go. Like, I'm not made to have a boss. Like, it's not in my DNA. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And that was the turning point for me. So when you do get that, maybe you don't, leave and go start your own business. Maybe you do. That's awesome. Call me. But if you don't, like, maybe it's not the right place for you. Maybe it's not the right manager for you. I would encourage you to ask lots of questions right? So when someone does give you feedback, try to, now I'm very emotional, but take the emotion out of it for that moment, right? Don't like, stop being emotional. I think that's a really good thing. But in that moment, take the emotion out of it and ask as many questions as you can so you can try to understand. Act like you're just trying to get information for somebody else to relay it to them. So take yourself out of it and try to learn and ask questions. And I'll be honest, that's how I found out when I asked all those questions that it wasn't going to work with that manager, right? I learned a lot by asking questions and taking the emotion out of it.
If I could just follow on that too, because I think it's even more insidious than that. And so I'm just going to kind of encourage everyone on the call that there's like a few key adjectives that are used to silence and sideline women all the time. And it's amazing how easy it is and really difficult. And difficult is usually part of a whisper campaign, right? It's, oh, she's difficult, right? So it's usually said in whispers. Sensitive is another one. Emotional, I find, is the third and probably the worst one of them all. And I like that one because I wonder then what does leadership look like? Is it sort of unemotional that you're like the captain of the sinking ship and I'm like the captain who probably ran the ship into the iceberg to begin with? So I think when you hear those ones, especially stop and dig a little deeper. And anytime you hear somebody use an adjective about somebody, that's not something you would apply to, I'll say, a white male. Really stop and ask what's happening under the surface there, because those can be really, really pernicious words.
Thank you for that, Melissa. Something that I wanted to just throw in there before we move to the next question on this topic is maybe a little bit of homework for the people that aren't as well acquainted with the conversation that we're having pertaining to this question, especially if there are any people that, you're identifying that you have found yourself in positions where you maybe are labeling these women as aggressive or too assertive. I would just challenge you to look up the term tone policing, especially in the context of BIPOC and women, and then even combine that female BIPOC. Tone policing, look that up and do a little bit of your own self-educating. And I think that will help kind of educate you a little bit more into where this question is coming from, to hopefully, if you are a male, if you are a person in a leadership position, to kind of question the way that you are reading a resume or looking into applicants, to kind of address some of that unconscious bias that you may have. We will move into a new question. So I have one from Sonia, and she says, great discussion so far, thank you. When it comes to thinking about individuals' perceptions of women and their role, how can we go about shifting people's mindsets and tackling folks' unconscious bias at the individual level?
I can chime in. What I found, we've grown up being taught that we should always have answers to questions. In school, we've been asked questions and then give answers. At work, it's the same thing. I think, asking questions is being seen as like maybe incompetent. So, you want to be asking. You want to be like answering questions instead of asking. So, but what I found actually it's very powerful in shifting narratives is if you just asked question. So instead of having a reaction to somebody's unconscious bias, to earlier question around bossy, right? So if somebody says, I'm bossy, hey, why are you so bossy? So I would ask them, well, can you tell me a little bit more about why you think I'm bossy? What did I do? What are some of the actions that to you would make you feel like somebody is bossy? I think asking questions, they have to answer their own questions, and so I found that that's a very effective way to not only that you don't have to face it head on, and sometimes I get angry when these things happen. So I shift the focus to actually have the other person to answer their own questions.
Terrific. Great, Peggy. Thank you. John, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I was going to say it's an opportunity, and I've heard a couple of people say this on my podcast, a couple of guests. But then my father has, like, my entire life has done this really well. Is he uses it as an opportunity to teach somebody why they have said something that's not correct, or they judged you in an incorrect way. And the best example I can give off the top of my head right now is I had a guest on. She's the CMO for the Atlanta Hawks, and she has dreads. She's such a boss, right? Like, she's so cool and so good at her job. And she, was made CMO, and she pulled into the executive parking lot and parked her car, and somebody came over and basically was like, you can't park here. It wasn't like, hey, welcome, like, are you new? Or like, the first thing was, you can't park here. And for Melissa, and you know, the episode, because she tells the story much better than I am, because it's her personal experience, but like, she talks about how she just, in that moment, she could have got really angry, and she didn't. And she chose her words very carefully. And she's like, it was an opportunity to teach somebody why what they said to me was wrong.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a terrific lesson to take away. And hopefully, the men in this call, as well as the women, in any situations where they're interacting with groups that they might not personally identify with, can, take that feedback honestly and receive it and apply it in the rest of their lives, instead of having that, like, raw, visceral reaction. That will be a great way to, overcome some of that unconscious bias. I have one question here from Haley, who's a women's basketball alumni. And she says, panelists, can you elaborate on your experiences of working with and for women who do not support other women? We all know them, and unfortunately, we cannot avoid them. What advice do you use for navigating these difficult relationships?
I'll go first. It's so tough, because one, it's just like, it breaks your heart, because you're like, wait, what are you doing? Like, what do you mean you don't, like, why are you being so difficult to work with? I mean, there's a couple of avenues you can go before you just kind of just accept it. But one is just kind of getting to know that person. Everybody has a story, and so you just don't know what somebody's going through. You just have to take that time, and that is more time of yours to get to know somebody and understand and learn more about them and try to make that relationship work. If that doesn't work, I always, no matter what, you have a job to do, and so does she. So at the end of the day, everything's laddering up to one common goal. You already have those set when you go out to do your work. Like, that's really important. So it has nothing to do with her or you. It has to do with the goal that you guys are going after. And then sometimes you have to just kind of try to sometimes you have to avoid that person. I hate to say it. Like, there's some, and I've heard other people on my podcast say this, and it kind of validated how I was when I was, working for a team. But sometimes you can't win them all. And I know that saying sounds so funny, but like, you can't, like, and sometimes you just have to let that go, but not before you exhaust everything and trying everything. And I always like the first one, and I'm really good at it. Like, I'm really one-on-one, forget about it. Like, getting to know people and talking and getting to know them on a personal level, so then you'll understand them a little bit better and why they are operating the way that they are. And I think for us too, as women, it's important to remember, like, when you are, like, it's no matter what industry you're in, it's tough out there. Everyone's so ambitious and so competitive, and there's only so many jobs. And so it's just important to make sure that you remember almost like how you carry yourself, but more importantly, that competition, like, you're your only competition. Do not worry about, the woman sitting next to you. Just because there's two women doesn't mean that, like, you have to be the best woman. Like, just be the best version of yourself and who you are. And don't let somebody knock you off your game who's difficult to get along with, because that happened to me, and I wasted so much energy, like so much energy trying to get that person to like me, and you know what I mean, like work with me. And at the end of the day, I finally just let it go. And it was I wish I had done that sooner.
Jahan, just to kind of point something else there that I think you kind of mentioned just slightly, but like if we hop back to that concept of like all these things that are like internalized, that we internalize as women, you know, starting from young girls, especially if we're looking up and we're not seeing a lot of women in these roles. And then we come to a point where we find ourselves in one of these roles and there is one other woman. There's this unfortunate competition that I think some women kind of internalize as like, well, there's two of us, like almost as like there can only be one. And in a lot of spaces there might be completely male dominated and there's one woman or two women. And so there is this sense of competition of like, is this spot available for me like indefinitely? Is my position at risk? And I think that can be where some of that like negative energy or like kind of a negative twist on competition, because competition can obviously be a very positive thing. Athletes, especially having learned that lesson, like your teammates, having competition with your teammates and with yourselves are like what drives you to be better. But in some contexts, we do see this like unhealthy version of competition because we can be threatened by one another. And that I don't think that's rooted from who we are. It's rooted from those stories that we've been told and therefore those stories that we've internalized. To kind of build off of that, we have a question from Megan, and she says, can any of the panelists comment on this feeling or pressure of when you are the only one, you represent everyone? When it comes to women taking a seat or breaking through in a traditionally male-dominated sphere, particularly in the world of sport. I know we kind of touched on that a little bit, but yeah, those pressures of being the only one in the room, of being the only woman, being the only person of color, you take on, or at least you feel as though you take on this responsibility to perform and be excellent. Do any of you want to speak to that?
Maybe I would start, by cautioning people to say, when you're feeling a lot of pressure, I think the first thing to do is to see how much of that pressure you're putting upon yourself. And I think in these situations too, you can't carry the weight of everything on you. You know, in places where, you know, it's been me, I always try to let my work speak for me anyways. Nothing is going to make me do a better job, or, you know, I always try my best in exactly every situation. And I don't think you can ask any more of yourself. And so again, I would just say, be kind to yourself, ensure that you're not the one putting all the pressure on yourself, and then just do your best to move forward.
Does anyone else want to comment on that one? If not, we can move on to the next question.
I'll just say really quickly, I think it's just it has a lot to do, I guess for me personally, it had a lot to do with just it's a mindset, right, issue. So I guess I'm really just repeating what Melissa said. Melissa, so sorry, but it's just, you know, you have this mindset issue, and you start to really, when you dissect it, it's not everybody else, because I know I went through that. And so I think one of the solutions is to try to do things like mentoring or speaking on panels or being a guest on someone's podcast, right? Like just lending your time to share your experiences, but don't feel like you have to do everything. Like you can't say yes to everything, because then you're going to be exhausted and you're not going to be able to bring your best self to work anymore.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for answering that. I have one question here from Wad, and it's addressed to Jahan and Liza specifically, but open to all the moderators if they have an opinion on the question as well. Wad asks, as a male sport admin, what can we do to work towards better representation of women in sport, and how can we elevate women's sport?
Really quick on the first one, it's really important to listen. It's really important to understand. And it's really important for whoever is working for you, male or female, to be seen and heard, right? And so as a leader, as a manager, that is hard to do. Like, I've led really big teams, and it's hard. It's hard to do. It's a lot of work, but it's really important, because once your team, feels seen and heard, they're going to be so loyal to you. It's unbelievable. So it almost is like you got to put up the work up front, but then after it becomes later down the line, it becomes a lot easier for you, because you create this loyal team, but it's got to be genuine. It's got to come from within.
I mean, that's always, yeah, you got to be genuine in all of this stuff. It can't just be like a PR mission, right? So like that, like, first of all, you have to mean it. So I think there's a really great example of this happening in real life right now. So instead of speaking to it really broadly, I'm going to direct you guys to a case study in the universe. So it is obviously International Women's Day. It is Women's History Month. And exactly 1 year ago, a year and a week ago, I was writing copy points for PWHPA women's hockey players to read about International Women's Day. And I was like writing terrible sentences about equality for them to read into a mic. And then we used a, freaking iPhone to tape them, just to put together some kind of content, because they didn't have the budget, right? So it's like, we're just doing this really scrappy. And we spent all of our time being like, this is such a drag, because, Sidney Crosby's favorite player is Marie-Philippe Poulin, the best all-time female hockey player. She's like over there. She's like probably 3 miles from my house. And he talked about her, once in Sports Illustrated. And I was like, he needs a whole social media campaign just celebrating her, right? And so we were like doing all the social media content, but we were like, we need the people with the big mics and the big platforms to support people who are still building the business models, right? Don't worry about the troll. Don't worry about all the nobody sports. Yeah, actually, you're totally wrong, junk mail. Like, shut up. If you want to support women in sport, become a fan and leverage the power you have. What you have is audience. What you might have volunteer time. You might have, who knows? You have all sorts of resources. Ask some questions about what resources you have that maybe they don't, and figure out how to cross-pollinate. It's really straightforward. If you went on Twitter and you looked up the PWHPA, you hashtag PWHPA. Last year, we had like no support from the men's side, right? This year, the women have played on the Blackhawks ice this last weekend. They played at Madison Square Garden, first ever women's professional hockey game to ever happen in Madison Square Garden last weekend. So they've got the support of the Rangers. They've got the support of, they're going to have the support of the entire original six in about 5 seconds. And if you look up all of the ad copy that's happening, you're seeing that it's male professional players and their incredible resources creating beautiful, polished social media content. And I can't even list it. It's all these professional players. It's Bauer. Bauer released an ad, I think it was today, which is kind of like, you're playing like a woman out there. And he's like, you're playing like a woman out there. You look like Marie-Philippe Poulin, keep it up, And it's like this, it's like a joke right now, right? Because it's like flip the script. But those are the conversations that like you can have, you can change, And so if you want to see how people are doing it, literally the men have come in force to support women's hockey the past 48 hours. And it's happening like live broadcast on Twitter. So like, you want to go look. Like, honestly, because like the trolls have no room when the people who we appreciate most in men's hockey, right, have our back. So this is like one little case, but I think you can see it and then you can model it. Go see how it's being done by the pros and then go copy them.
Awesome. Thanks, Liza. Okay, guys, so that will be we're going to wrap up there with the Q&A. We just wanted to give the panelists one last opportunity. We just have like one final question. Basically, what is one piece of practical advice that you would give young people starting out in their careers? So this is just an opportunity for you guys to share any final little pieces of advice, little tidbits that maybe the conversation didn't give you the opportunity to discuss previously. Melissa, you can start.
Sure. I would say be open and be flexible and realize that so many skills can be transferable from one thing to another. And, I say this from experience. I made a huge career shift, after about 15 years and walked into a job that I had absolutely no experience or background in. But so much of it was the skills that you can bring from one place to another. And so just be really open and don't dovetail yourself to, you have to have, exactly what a job might say you need. Think of all the extracurriculars that you've done, think of all your experiences on the courts or on the fields or wherever you've played, and know that you have a ton of skills that you bring with you, and just be ready to use them.
Thank you, Melissa. Does anyone else want to hop in?
Sure, I'll jump in. I guess my biggest piece of advice is when it comes to using your voice and knowing that it can be scary to speak truth to power, to be your authentic self every single day when you show up to work. I always encourage people to create their own playbook, and the way you do it, it's super simple. Every day, at the end of the day, it takes a few minutes. Just sit down and just think about your day. What were your top 3 wins? And then what are top 3 things that you would do differently, right? And just how would you do them differently? And you do this over time, and you just have this playbook, and you start to see themes and things that ooh, I can use some work in this area, or, oh my God, I'm amazing at this. This is a selling point if I go interview somewhere because I keep crushing this one thing. So I just encourage you to invest some time into yourself as you start to use your voice and show up authentically to work every day.
Awesome. Thank you, Jahan. Peggy, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah. Believe in yourself and don't wait for others to believe in you. I think often we get in our own way. So don't let you be the one. There's enough barriers already. And I will say that, I went from a high school dropout to getting my master's degree. And the people in my class, a lot of them obviously have their degrees. They have many have their graduate's degree already. There were doctors, there were lawyers in the room. And so one of my best friend now, it's a ER doctor. And he's like, I don't understand your thought process. Why would you even think about getting your master's degree when you have not done an undergrad? That's crazy. And the thing is, obviously, there are things that I know that will prop me up to make me successful in going after a master's degree, given my career success. But if I hadn't actually taken a bet on myself, I would still be a high school dropout. So I can't say enough that you have to believe in yourself first, and then other people will see it.
Amazing, Peggy. Thank you. Okay, Liza.
Well, keep it brief. I know we're almost done. The only thing that we haven't really covered is I want to just talk about everybody's anxiety that they have to follow their passion tomorrow. A whole bunch of you have no idea what your passion is. It's so fine, you guys. It's so totally appropriate. You barely know who you are as grown people yet. So this is my advice. If you aren't totally I know exactly what I want to do and I have this passion, if you're feeling oh God, that is so developmentally appropriate. So here's your homework instead, okay? Or if you're I also come from parents who can't provide me a safety net and I have to take a job that's not my passion and I feel like a sellout. Nope. I have a day job. You need to just look at your own situation and make choices that work for you. And while you are doing whatever it is you have to do to pay your student loans or get a little life experience to figure out what you're interested in, do two things. Be the best possible teammate everywhere you go. Take all the competitiveness of your athletic and turn it inward. You're your own competition. Jahan said this is so true. Compete with yourself. Don't compete with your peers and other women. Be their best allies. Be the team captain who's like cheering them on. That reputation of being a good teammate will precede you, and it will buoy you, and it will give you that great network. But leave a little time and space to figure out who you are, and don't be afraid to try lots of things, because your passion is going to help find you as you learn skills and you have experiences. So if you're listening to all of this and you're like, but I don't know what I like except for basketball, and I don't want to be in basketball business, whatever, that's fine. So keep playing on the side, get a job, be excellent at it. And then when you feel like you've learned everything, try something else. And you'll lily pad your way there. It's no rush. Trust me, no rush. Be zen about it and just be good to people on your way, and you'll find your way there. That's it.
Amazing. This has been an amazing panel, and it's tough to summarize everything that we've talked about over the last 2 hours in 30 seconds, but I'll try and reflect on those last statements and just bring them all to a summary before we leave here. And to me, Melissa, Liza, Peggy, and Jahan, you all share this idea of, you can't master plan your life. Don't be worried about not finding exactly where you want to be in 30 seconds or 3 years or 10 years. Be open, be flexible. Think about the things that you have achieved and be proud of them, and be authentically yourself. And from what I understand, and hopefully I'll be able to apply this myself, is that, if I keep those things in mind, then I don't have to worry about urgency. And so for all of us on here, whether you're a woman, whether you're an athlete, or whether you're just tuning in to learn, that's the best message that we can take away, especially I think in this world of COVID-19, where there is so much uncertainty. We don't have to be certain about where we're going to be right now.
Bennett, that was so well said. I just wanted to add there, I hope that people are able to leave this event having, had a couple take home points, things that have really impacted you. I hope that someone's story has been able to resonate with you in some capacity. And we thank these panelists so much for joining us. This was we feel super grateful that we have had the time for you guys to just share your advice, share your stories. And I just want to encourage the viewers to kind of take this as an example and ask yourself the questions of what you have to offer other people as well. We had 4 amazing panelists come here and share their life stories and their advice to help all of you. And definitely every single person watching this has something to offer in every space that they enter. So I kind of challenge you to spend some time reflecting on that and appreciating yourself for what you have to offer, and then reflecting on how you can share that with other people. With that being said, thank you so much, everyone. We will pass it back to Alexa just for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much. I don't even know where to begin, but I'll kind of just, I feel like the point that was just made about, be that best possible teammate that you can, and compete with yourself. That definitely resonated with me. And I really love Brianna's story about her history teacher and being the best at what you love and not listening to anybody else and the pressure that they put on you. There's so much pressure as a young woman growing up, and it doesn't just stop when you get to be at that grown-up stage. It's how you kind of combat it and challenge it yourself. And that whole, if there's no opportunities, then create them. It seems like all of the women on our panel tonight were able to create something for themselves and be a trailblazer. So it was really interesting to hear those various experiences with, at the beginning, with the equity gaps and there were so many intersectional locations from all of our panelists, and whether it was, you know, a bias from other people, or like was said earlier, those internal biases that we hold against ourselves. And I think that keeps a lot of women quiet. I've definitely been in those positions before where I'm like, you know what, like what I'm saying is not necessarily important, but those are all the ideas that are so important to bring up. I know someone had the example of amplifying those voices when you see those women in the room writing all those great ideas down. So I love that there was so many actionable things that we could take away, and there I love those amazing trailblazing stories of lifting yourself up and doing that heavy lifting to get into those leadership and sports spheres, and pushing professional boundaries and challenging the narratives in our lives and rewriting them. And, you know, women are evolving our entire lives. And I think that just goes to show the resiliency that we do have and continue to have, even through this extremely challenging and very bizarre year. I think to conclude, I just would love to thank our panelists. This conversation would not have happened without you. So Jahan, Peggy, Melissa, and Liza, and then our hosts as well, Bennett and Brianna, and the Mcmaster athletics team, and specifically Christine Costa from Mcmaster Human Resources, who provided all of the technical capabilities this evening. It went so smoothly. Thank you so much. Of course, we would not be here without all of your ears to listen as well. So thank you for all coming out this evening, whether you're at home, whether you're spending a late night at work, having dinner, wherever you are. I hope that you learned something new. You get to take away a new perspective, make a new connection, or have a new actionable behavior or item that you want to act on. On behalf of RBC, we are committed to helping all of you prepare for your careers. We run events like this throughout the year. And as your school year is coming to an end, those exams are coming on, you just finished your midterms, please do not hesitate to reach out for any support that you do need. Usually we would be, again, located in the David Braley Athletic Center, but now we can be reached virtually through LinkedIn. And I'm sure all of our lovely panelists as well would love to connect on LinkedIn and have some new connections. So again, thank you all for making this evening possible and for celebrating yourselves and the women in our community. And it seems like beyond the Canadian borders as well, to some capacity as tonight. So enjoy the rest of your evening and take care during this challenging time, and everybody, happy International Women's Day.